Hi you guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Allie Wilkins. Thank you so much for being here. So today we're going to talk about the cycles of the feminine and just kind of like whatever else wants to come in. This is a huge topic and it's really hard for me personally to just like narrow it down because I feel that there's so much information that's connected to this that helps you really understand why working with the cycles of life, no matter what your gender is, what you identify as, why working with the cyclical nature of life is so important. So there's a lot that I could cover here. If you want to know the full picture of this, I have a masterclass on my website that's free that you can, well, for now it's free, that you can watch called Return to Goddess. And I talk about the full history of the shift from the matriarchy to the patriarchy, and how that's impacted us. So today's video, I'm going to just focus on the cycles of the feminine and why it's so important for us to come back into a cyclical process of life. So the patriarchy, most people also I used to not even really know what a patriarchy was. It's just kind of this term that's thrown around and you're like, oh, all these toxic masculines, like all these white toxic leaders, right? And it's that, yes, but it's also so much deeper than that. The patriarchy actually began about 5000 BC. We think that it started, I used to think that it was just like the last 1,000 years or something. Like, no, this is deeply rooted. So our programming, I say that so that you can understand, our programming goes back that far. That's 7,000 years ago. Cultures used to operate from matriarchal, cultures used to be matriarchal. So there's a massive shift in belief systems, right? Matriarchal systems operate with the flow of nature. They completely honor and revere the cycles of life, and they see everything as being divine. Everything is sacred. Divinity and like spirit is not separate from any part of anything. All practical life is blended in with spirit. You're talking about like agriculture, finances, relationships, sex, health, something that I found so interesting, and this is a really perfect example of the difference between the matriarchy and the patriarchy. In matriarchal systems, they would be very conscious of how much they were harvesting on the land, and they would only grow what they needed to survive. They wouldn't be growing in excess, and they would honor that. And they had such a close relationship with the earth, and they also were extremely advanced and had a lot of deep wisdom. So they could kind of intuitively sense, and also other measures that we probably don't know about today, what was too much. Now in our world today, we overproduce to an extreme in that our soil is almost depleted, right? We produce one crop on land so that it creates the most amount of profit, and that destroys the land. So in a matriarchal culture, they would understand, oh, the soil needs to be regenerated, and this is actually a sacred process, and it wouldn't be about the profit. It would be about the nourishment for the people in that community, and for thank you to the land for creating that food. Now, do you feel the difference, right? And that's how everything in their cultures were. And when you think about matriarchy and patriarchy, sometimes you think it's like a matriarchy is only run by women, and that's sometimes the case. It's sometimes the case, but it's like basically equality, whereas the patriarchy is the removal of the feminine, the removal of any sort of sacredness. It's also the separation of spirits, the sacredness, the divine, God, and everything. So they're completely separated, right? So there's no God blended in with our financial systems. There's no, back in the day, it was even like sex and God was so separated. Now it's a little bit different. More people are coming back together with that. But so much of our trauma comes from these really early times, especially like 2000 BC to at the time of Jesus. That's when the deepest programming was happening. And there were, you guys, they were doing crazy things that we don't hear about today. We don't learn about. And as I started studying this, I was like, what the fuck? How can we not have learned about this? This is psychological torment. This is the deepest manipulation I've ever read or heard about, ever. And it's just insane that we haven't been taught this stuff. And there's a big reason why we haven't been taught it. So I'm going to leave that there. If you want to learn more about that, watch that masterclass. It's called Return to Goddess. Like I said, I'll put the link in the comments below so you can watch it. So matriarchal cultures operated in cycles. We operate in a patriarchal society in a linear function. So the feminine energy operates in cycles, masculine energy operates more linearly, but life itself happens in cycles. So we have both of those energies within us, and we need to know when we use each one, right? But because the feminine has been removed from the patriarchal systems, we don't operate at any format in cycles, and we actually have been taught to like pretend we don't operate in cycles at all. Like we ignore things, we suppress, we deny, we repress, all of those sorts of things. So for example, our menstrual cycles as women, this used to be something that was deeply ingrained in the life of the community. So women, you've probably heard about this, women would all go to what they called a red tent. There's many different practices, but women on their menstrual cycles would go into a particular place, either in solitude later in times or earlier when the matriarchy was fully running. They would be in community together. And this was a sacred time. It was a time of like, I use this phrase like they looked forward to their periods. You don't hear about that today, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to have my period. It was a totally different energy. And then when the patriarchy started, the church basically was like, women are disgusting and women are vile. And there's a lot more about that, so I'm not going to go there in this video, but they're like, the menstrual cycle is disgusting. You can be apart over here, and that's how it started. You can have your time when you're on your cycle over here, but basically what happened is that got very distorted, and then people were like, the menstrual cycle is a dirty time. It's not. It just the magic of that cycle became completely lost. And now we're all solitary in our cycles, and so we don't have any sort of experience of that community. Most people, unless you live in an indigenous culture. So that's just one example of like the vast difference of, I just use it in these terms, looking forward to your cycle, which is massively minimizing the sacredness, the what would actually occur when all of these women were on their cycles together, and how we experience it today. And there's actually a lot of, I don't know like where this comes from, but there's a lot of thoughts about war beginning because the earth needs blood, and women used to give their blood back to the earth. Now, like I live in an apartment, I give my blood back to my plants. I don't have my own land to put, like I can guarantee if I was going around putting like my blood on the palm trees, the apartment complex would have a problem with that. Like, so anyways, they say that the blood needs the earth needs our blood to regenerate. And we used to do that every single month with our menstrual blood. And then because that practice stopped, war also began at the same time, and the blood started to come from the shedding of like killing people, right? So yeah, that's just one example of how our cyclical nature is like, shh, don't talk about it. I mean, if you think about it, just in the last 20 or 30 years, you could like send your husband to go get tampons for you, which PS, you should like, let's not use tampons. They're actually really bad for you. Anyways, I'll do another video about that. But so yeah, that's one cycle that has been very desecrated, and we don't honor that cycle. Additionally, just Earth itself operates in cycles. And so what matriarchal cultures understood that we don't understand on a widespread scale today is that these cycles actually allow for our deepest growth. They allow for our deepest efficiency and our deepest, our fullest expression and our fullest availability of energy. So now we're being asked to operate in a linear fashion. So we're always for example, the 9 to 5 is a perfect example. We work 9 to 5, 4 weeks a month. That's it, right? So when you understand these different, God, you guys, there's so much that I can talk about here because we have so many different forms of cycles. So let's just talk about your personal energy cycle for a moment. So if you know your human design, or if you've heard of human design before, I have a video about human design here if you don't know what it is. everyone's energy operates in a different way. So for example, I'm what's called a projector. This is one of the 5 types of energy designs in human design, of energy types. And so my energy, I have a lot of energy, and then I have like no energy. And there's a lot of intricacy into how you can see how your energy actually works, how you're designed. Someone else could be a manifesting generator and they have huge amounts of energy that's regenerating all the time. A projector's energy doesn't regenerate. We are absorbing energy from outside of us. So that means that we have to utilize our energy in a different way. So me being in a 9-to-5 sort of position like I used to be in, expected to work like consistently the same amount of hours all the time, that actually I'm not operating in my highest because I'm not working with my natural design of energy. When I understand how that energy fluctuates, I'm able to say, okay, I have a lot of energy now, so I can actually do a lot of really good creating. If I try to create when I'm in a low energy space, it's going to be shitty and it's not, and I'm also just it's going to really burn me out. So that's one example. But also like, let's move a little bit into the cycles of the feminine. So we have these different cycles of feminine energy that we haven't been taught anything about. We're starting to hear about some of them. So some of these cycles are things like the void, death, rebirth, creation. There's many different cycles. These are some of the main ones. And we avoid these except the creation one. Our society loves creation. And so one thing I kind of forgot to mention in this is that we function linearly. A patriarchy is about making profit. A patriarchy is about power, exploitation, greed, and control. And making profits is the number one thing. So anything will be exploited to make profit, including humans. This is one of the main like components of the machine that is a patriarchy. True? Yes. Hard to hear? Yes. That's the truth of it though. So we operate in a linear function because that's how we make the most profit. That's what is thought of how we make the most profit for others, for the system itself. And so if we start to operate in cycles, that's going to change the material profit, but like our deep connection to self, to the nature around us, to life, just amplifies so dramatically. But it might not look like an increase in profits. It also might look like an increase in profits. Like, let's just be real. So anyways, there's all these different cycles of life that because we are trained to operate linearly, we straight up ignore them. So just like the seasons, you see the seasons go fully into each cycle, right? When it's winter, the leaves fall off. They're not like, no, I wish it was summer. I'm just going to hold on to my leaves. Like, they fully let go of their leaves. The trees might look barren. There's nothing on them, right? They fully let go. They're not in resistance. And then the spring comes and everything starts blooming. Or the winter comes and everything's like really, sleeping, dormant, resting, collecting energy. And then the spring comes and everything blooms again because nature is honoring these cycles. It's not trying to fight them, and it's fully allowing them. We have not been taught to do that. So number one, we're not educated about what these cycles even are to know what's happening. And also with the feminine is very intense. The feminine energy, we've learned very little about it. We've learned that feminine energy is the nurturing mother, the doting, devoted wife, the seductress. That's what we've learned about feminine energy. Those are the qualities of feminine that are accepted. And there are so many more aspects. And a lot of these aspects have been demonized at the start of the patriarchy, that these aspects were wildly celebrated. The matriarchy. Matriarchal cultures honored a goddess. It was one goddess who had all these different aspects to her. The patriarchy broke up the one goddess and put her into all these different goddesses. You can see this very clearly with Greek mythology. All of the myths almost have been transformed into patriarchal storylines. So I'll do another video about that some other time because that's really interesting in itself. But anyways, so in ancient times, these cultures fully honored each of these cycles. So how do we honor them? We learn about what they are, and then we allow ourselves to fully go in it. So a lot of times the other thing is we avoid it because it's uncomfortable, which is what I was getting at. The goddess is deep. Our culture is extraordinarily surfacey. It's very, there's not a lot of depth. Most people can't, I don't want to say it that way. People are getting more comfortable with holding depth. And so many aspects of the goddess have been demonized because the patriarchy, those systems removed the feminine. And so these aspects of the feminine weren't convenient, and they would never have tolerated, they basically weren't submissive. So they wouldn't have tolerated the changes that were being made. But there's a lot to go into there. Fear and control are very persuasive. So our job now is to bring back the cycles of the feminine and learn how to work with them, fully operate in them. This is for our deepest expansion and understanding of life and ourselves. Life is so much more rewarding when you are able to go to your depths instead of like hiding out on the surface. You don't even realize that you're doing it until you start to go into these depths and you're like, holy fuck. So let's talk about the void. This is a really, this is one of the ones that we avoid the most. So also with the death cycle, but the void is basically when you are in a space of nothingness, a space of complete emptiness. But this could be celebrated. We could be like, I'm manifesting from pure potential. Like this is a blank slate, right? But what we actually do is we're like, oh my God, I have no control. There's nothing to hold on to. I'm unsafe, because literally our society trains us to be busy all the time. It trains us to be uncomfortable with stillness. Because why? When we're still, we could actually get to know ourselves. When we're still, we could actually learn how to source our power from within instead of from an external system. That's how the patriarchy controls us. When we are self-sourced and we understand that we don't need anything external of us to give us anything, we're dangerous. So yeah. So the void is something that definitely we've been taught to avoid, because that's something that is, if you learn to master the void, your whole experience of life will be so different. I mean, it's really the same with any of these cycles, but the void, I think, is probably the one that we're the least comfortable with, because it requires that you learn to, it's sort of like, okay, you're dropped in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and it's, 400 feet deep. You're in the middle of the ocean. There's no land anywhere near. It's sort of like that. There's nothing to grasp onto, nothing to hold onto. And can you learn to float in that instead of like trying to swim until you tire out and then you drown? Like, how can you float through it? So the void, you might be finding yourself in a place where you're just like, God, I have no idea who I even am anymore. Like, what do I even want? What am I doing in my life? What's next? I don't know what's going to happen from here. Or a really common example is like after you've achieved a lot of stuff and you're like, okay, I did everything I thought I was supposed to do. Now what? And like no ideas are coming in. You have nothing that you can be like, okay, here's the new thing I'm going to go for. It's just blank space around you. And usually what we do is we fill that space with drugs, alcohol, partying, TV, food, sex, whatever it is, and we avoid it. And one of the most powerful things that we can do is fully submerge ourselves into these cycles. It's going to be uncomfortable. This is also shadow work. So they say that the goddess can live, and she does live in the underworld and also in the heavenly realm. So like she can easily swim in both. We all need to easily be able to swim in both. We've been taught that there's a hell and a heaven. Thank you, church, for introducing duality to the world, because before it was all one. It was truly all one. You guys, it's so hard to just leave this at like a 20-minute video because there's so much. Like, if you're interested in this topic, please go watch the masterclass, because I'm like, but I have to say so much more. I can't just say that. So we want to learn how to operate in these cyclical ways, because this is the way of life. When we try to be linear about everything, we are defying the laws of nature. And so of course we're going to live these like shallow, surfacey ass lives where it's not even just that there's not depth with other people, it's that you don't get to understand your true self. And so much of this is just, you can't not talk about the patriarchy with this, because this system made us fear our most primal parts of self. Example, so sex was obviously very, very, very demonized. Sex outside of procreation was like, it was only used to like have a baby. And then they would force people to repent afterward. Like, what? And then I learned this too. There was actually a law that if men masturbated, they would die. You would be sent to death because you were wasting life. You were wasting sperm. That's the sort of conditioning that we're coming from. And so yes, that might be 3,000 years ago, but think about how deeply that was ingrained for 1,000 years. There's still trickles of that in our systems. And so if your sexual nature is something that is so demonized like that, and we're taught to repress it, we're taught to repress our desire for basically anything, sex, money, like any sort of actual pleasure, that's like, if we go into our actual shadow body, there's going to be so much stuff lurking there because it's been repressed for thousands of years and we think that it's bad. Maybe not on a conscious level, but you think parts of yourself are bad. Like you have this certain kink or you have this certain like desire, but parts of yourself judge you for having that. And so when you go deeply into these cycles, you're going to see all of it. And some people, that's very, very scary. But you're not free if you can't see all parts of yourself and love all parts of yourself. That's what shadow work is. So when you go deeply into these cycles, you're going to see all sorts of stuff. The cycle I think that we are constantly trying to be in the patriarchal system is the creator cycle, the creation cycle. We want constant production. We want constant like ideas and creativity and creation of things. And when we're the creatrix, we're thinking about, how do I create what it is that I desire? How do I create from my word? There are also deeper, more powerful ways to do it than the 3D way that we learn. So yeah, there are many cycles of the feminine. So starting with the void, that's the blank slate. And then we move into rebirth. And then we move into the creatrix. And then we move, there are some cycles in between this, but then we move into the death cycle, where whatever it is, just like the moon, just like our menstrual cycles, something is we start from nothing, like a seed, the plant grows, then the plant's leaves fall off and the plant dies, and a new seed is planted. Insert new circle, right? It's the circle of life, the cycles. So how can we start to operate that in that way? And then there's so much less suffering. There's so much less suffering. And we're more, I don't want to say the word like in control, because actually I think we're probably very much less caring about control when we work with cycles. It's easier for us to trust the cycles of life because we see that everything happens cyclically and nothing is permanent. Everything is constantly moving. When we're in a linear fashion, it's like, feels like we're hit so much harder when things happen because we don't see the cycles. At least not as potently, not as profoundly. So yeah, working with the cycles of life is very important. So I'm actually going to be, I've created an initiation mastermind. This is something that's going to be a 6-month experience. I'm so excited about it. We're going to be going each month into one cycle of the feminine. And so that's going to sort of be the energetic theme of the month. And so there's going to be a little bit of teaching on that, but it's really just a mastermind that's taking you into your next level of your initiation with the goddess. So how are you going to be able to tap into your next level of power, your next level of truth through moving through these cycles? And there's just a lot of beautiful stuff that's included in this. So, you know what? You can just go to my website if you're interested in that. If you want to have deep support, if you want to have shamanic activations on a bi-weekly level with me. We'll have group calls every 2 weeks, and there's going to be an activation based on whatever's going on with you guys in the group. Then you are going to have personal sessions throughout the 6 months. You're going to have a group chat that's available all the time throughout the 6 months, which is priceless. And yeah, there's like so much more that I think I'm forgetting right now because I'm tired from talking about all these cycles. But I'm really excited about this mastermind. It's called the Initiation Mastermind. The energy behind it is so potent. Like I can already feel who is supposed to be in this space, your energy. So if you feel drawn towards it, go check out the landing page. I'm going to put it in the comments below, and see how you feel. You will know if this is for you immediately because it's for a very select few people who are really feeling called to activate goddess consciousness. But really what that means is starting to learn how to fully embody the cycles of life yourself so that you can then become a steward of that spreading. As that spreads throughout the world, we move back into more of a matriarchal cycle. The environment becomes better. Our personal experience of life becomes so much more nourished and deep and intentional. And we stop operating in this like machine. We're operating as little robots in this life. And so that shit has to change. And that changes by us moving back into our cyclical nature. And yeah, I could go on and on and on. It's going to be epic. We start July 1st. Registration closes June 30th. Today is June 15th, I think. The early bird ends tonight. So most of you guys will probably watch this later on. But if you do catch it early and you want to join us, the early bird pricing ends tonight. So anyways, thank you guys for listening. Please put your reflections, your thoughts, your comments in below so that I can hear what you have to say about all of this. If there's anything that really spoke to you, I'd love to hear that. So anyways, I hope that you have a beautiful rest of your night, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.